live.
And if you're a cog in a machine and you're like having Mark Levin on night after night, even though everyone knows it's like absurd, how can your wife respect you?
So recently, Tucker Carlson had a podcast concerning the biggest problem with the American news media and what the difference is between the people who participate in the new independent media compared to the legacy media and what ramifications that has for our culture and society. This is in the context of a conversation with Saagar and Enjeti, and both men weigh in. Let's see what they have to say. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Your story describes how low the barrier to entry is.
Yes.
If you know what you want to say, if you have a point of view, if you're committed to honesty and independence, you can actually do it.
You can do it.
That's why it's so thrilling.
That is why it's thrilling. I mean, I was taking a look at your setup this morning and I was talking to some of your tech guys and I said, isn't it amazing that we couldn't even do this 10 years ago?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at your equipment. I have much of the same equipment. I mean, look, it's decent money, but it's not a lot of money.
Oh, no.
Actually.
No.
And especially compared to, I mean, you and I have seen the Fox News New York control room. I mean, it's like being in the International Space Station. It's crazy.
Oh, when they fired me, they came and sent their guys up here and ripped, because I did my show from here for years, and they ripped out all their equipment, which is fine. It was their equipment.
Yeah, sure.
And so we're like, and we have a full studio that, you know, we built with their money. You know, my guys built it, but whatever. And they put all their tech in there, and then they took it all away. I wasn't mad, but I was like, okay, I have to pay for this now out of my pocket because I'm unemployed. And we just moved to our dining room table, where it's literally our family dining room table we're sitting now. And it didn't cost that much.
No.
So I think that's I never talk about money or business, or because I'm not an expert in either one, but I just think it's so exciting to know that you can do that.
And I hope that's inspiring to people who are out there. I think really what it comes down to is not only audience, but the ability to say what you actually think.
Yes.
And what I have found is that some of the most miserable people in all of media are the people who work in these corporations.
Oh, yes.
Because they know and want to say many of the things you and I are saying. And they'll tell us privately, of course, but they'll never say it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. You know, podcaster setups are actually pretty reasonably priced, and people can get started with that no problem. You don't have to have an advanced studio to do that sort of work and put those sort of videos out on the internet. And the barrier to entry is lower and lower. It keeps getting lower and lower, and that encourages this new media landscape we're seeing. I think it's a great benefit. I mean, it just seems like the Dan Rathers and Peter Jennings and, you know, Wolf Blitzers of the world are getting replaced by the Chris Williamsons and Tom Bilyeu's and Joe Rogans and Theo Vons, and it's a really actually inspiring thing that they can't just limit our information to a small subset of elites where everything is filtered through them.
And I don't really know how much money that's worth, but beyond that, I don't really know how, as a human being, you know, you can just continue to get up and every day.
I agree. And I empathize, because I was a TV anchor for most of my life. I empathize with the guys who like get the guest readout. You know, they sit down before the show, like, who are we interviewing today? And there's Mark Levin on there, and like, nobody likes Mark Levin, and he's horrible television. He's screechy, and what he's saying is like deranged.
Tucker never lets an opportunity to bash Levin lately pass by, and hey, I'm here for it. I love it. You know, he's one of the most vile neocons ever, so keep it up, Tucker. I'm all for it.
And even if you sort of agree with Mark Levin's point of view, you can't have Mark Levin on TV.
Yeah.
It's just an insult to the audience, and it's an insult to the anchor. And having to see Mark Levin and turning off camera and being like, this fucking guy again? Like, why are we doing this? And they're going to be like, oh, the second floor told us to do it. Oh! Even if you're totally on board with, you know, killing every Muslim or whatever their program is, that still has got to drive you crazy. It's like an assault on your self-respect every single time.
But what I found, and I'm sure you find the same, is that what I saw for them is they started to believe that proximity to power is power itself. And what I found really gross about that is they start to fetishize like the most ridiculous things, as in who gets the first rope line when you get to ask Trump a question. I mean, the amount of actual physical fighting that happens in that scrum, people would genuinely not believe.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, it does seem like the press corps is so lustful and ambitious toward power, and by proximity rubbing elbows with people. Rather than standing on principle, it seems like the overriding mentality in legacy news is just to get as close as possible, be amiable enough while trying to get information, become friends, and through proximity, maybe you'll get great connections. It's a connection network, of course, of sorts. Whereas the independent media is much more individualistic, more dissident leaning, more kind of open to dissident and dissenting views. And, there really is such a stark contrast between the two worlds now, and we're seeing the legacy media die off in many ways. And I do think it's largely a generational thing because, a lot of our parents, they still watch cable news, your boomer TV, you might say. And it's not always the case. More and more people are gravitating toward, YouTube and, Twitter and different programs like that and independent media stations. But, that is a reality. But I think it's only really one generation away from death. And I think some of the biggest scams have put the final nails in the coffin. The Russiagate hoax, the Jan 6 insurrection host, the whole COVID propaganda and how that was sold by major networks. You're seeing it all open people's eyes and explore new opportunities. And I think it's the most actually uplifting and white-pilling thing about the culture right now.
Really?
Oh yeah, I got hit in the head once actually with an elbow from a photographer for taking his spot, even though there's no unassigned spots. These are minutia, but what I'm saying is it's a level of psychosis that takes over because
in the White House press corps.
In the White House press corps, everything is about access to the president, and so everybody is jockeying in a zero-sum environment where everyone is trying to get the interview or going to schmooze this person or that person. But the problem with that is they turn from practitioner to starting to believe that they themselves are important and this vital conduit of information. And what you turn into is basically an apparatchik of the state environment that I'm talking about. And so
yeah, we've certainly seen that, especially in the last few years. It's always probably been a phenomenon, but really we see that in the last few years that these news anchors and that these corporate media journalists essentially just become arms of the ruling class, the ruling elite, and the governments in power. That really is the case, and, we see it all the time.
Many of the anchors and others, they live for the black tie war at White House Correspondents' Dinner or getting invited to a cocktail party or a book party. I mean, this is the currency of Washington and of New York. It has been for decades. But you start to live, you start to fill that emptiness inside of you with the knowledge that you get to FaceTime with a sub-cabinet appointee at a dinner, and you can use that information because Senator Schumer knows your name. These are all very important things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just speaking for myself, but I'd much rather attend a lecture by Ron Paul than a cocktail party reception with Janet Yellen. I'm just saying. That's just my personal preference. If yours is different, fair enough. But there's my hierarchy of desire when it comes to this sort of thing.
For the social capital. And this is pathetic. I want people to know this is pathetic. And I watch people live their entire lives on Capitol Hill, in the White House press corps, in television and other, for all of these like imperial level events that are put on to just make them feel special and continue on in the machine. And I actually didn't realize how radical it was for people like you or people like me to say, I actually don't care about that at all. I don't care if I ever go to another cocktail party or another black tie dinner or any of these things, simply to be in the presence of people who are actually powerful. I would rather just critique them and say what I actually think. And the irony, of course, is, as you have found out, when you say what you actually think and you are critical of them in an honest way, they take you so much more seriously.
Yes.
They laugh at you when you're one of those people who cares about cocktail parties or any of that. You're one of the most useful cogs in the machine. It's the people they can't control or the people who they call because they're the inconvenient voices.
So that was, it's interesting you said that. That was my next question. So the whole process of covering the White House, being in the White House press corps, going to the briefings and the gaggle and all that, going to the parties, are you actually getting information?
No, I've never gotten more information than what I do right now. I actually, during the 12-day war, I literally never got more information from inside of the entire apparatus than I ever did when I was covering the White House. And it was because I was so critical of the Trump administration, of the direction that they were taking. And many of the people who I spoke to, for the record, actually were almost none who I knew personally.
Yeah, it just seems like a lot of the garbage spewed from the corporate news outlets is just regime propaganda and not true information anyways. And I assume that's true about information that they provide to journalists too, because the journalists have to then trickle that information down to the public and disseminate it that way. Whereas like true journalists like Glenn Greenwald and Aaron Mattei and Max Blumenthal and James O'Keefe, they're actually doing real journalistic work. Saagar is now too as well. And I imagine you get much better information that's better sourced, better explored, and better researched than you'd ever get through CNN or those who support it, and those CNN anchors that have special connections in the White House News Corps and such like that.
Almost all simply saw my commentary and agreed with me and wanted a conduit for information to be able to get out of there.
Yes.
And that's a great lesson, by the way, for any white aspiring journalists or others who listen, is they will take you much more seriously if you hit them in the face. And hitting them in the face makes them kind of shocked because it's so counter to the way that the machine works. When you work in the machine, they can call your editor, they can call your boss, they can call your advertiser, they can put a significant amount of pressure on you. But when they can't control you, they start to freak out.
No, I think that's right.
That is one of the most useful lessons of my life, actually, in terms of coverage and in terms of journalism and the ability to speak out. Speaking out can get you, is unfortunately such a differentiator from where the entire traditional system really starts to work.
What's the downside?
Well, the downside is, a freezing out of the entire social movement of professional Washington. Is that professional Washington protects its own. It's effectively is a jobs network.
No, they don't protect their own in Washington. Come on, we just had this Epstein memo released from the DOJ and FBI. Nothing says that they do that, right? No way. I don't believe it.
For each other, so that people who are in and out of government always have reliable sources of income. Implicit within that is that, hey, this is what we think about Israel. This is what we think about X, Y, taxes. This is what we think about the carried interest loophole. We don't talk about that. The step-up basis. This is what we think about cutting Social Security. This is an accepted fact. We need to accept this. That it's acceptable, to kick elderly people off Social Security or Medicare or food stamps, and we just take this information, and in exchange for that information, we get a job for the rest of our lives. If I hadn't gone independent, I could have easily relied on working in Washington until the age of 65 within the machine. That would have been actually very doable. This was the risk, actually, is saying what you actually want to say. That is the riskiest thing you can do within the system. And in exchange, you will no longer get invited to these dinners or any of these other things. You have to be okay with that.
Yeah, as Ron Paul said, truth is treason in the empire of lies, and if you're a purveyor of truth, you're an automatic enemy to the regime. And this goes for all sorts of different avenues, all sorts of different topics, whether it's war or foreign policy, whether it's economics, whether it's the surveillance state and the police state, the deep state, the intelligence apparatus. If you're telling the truth about these entities, you will not be taken kindly to by those in power. And I think that's the ultimate lesson that we've learned time and time again, especially in my lifetime. It just seems to be getting worse and worse. And thankfully, there's, the new independent media to try to counteract that to some extent, or at least make it irrelevant. Make it irrelevant to the extent that they don't have as much power over you in terms of the information. It's an information war. And they're going to be on the losing side of it, if not at least partially on the losing side of it already. They're losing control of the information, and you're seeing a giant panic as the result of that.
You have to be okay, I think, with something that you have found as well, by being denounced by people who you knew personally, or people who, who you would help in their career. People who you, in many ways, you're like, I would personally never do that to you. I can't really believe that you're doing it to me.
Oh, I know.
And the reason you're doing it is, we all know what it is you're being controlled by a broader and a bigger, either financial or foreign lobby interest.
I've had this experience.
And this is the red line for you?
Where you call people and you're like, I can't believe you said that about me. Yeah. Calling me a bigot or whatever when you know that I'm not. And I don't even go on the internet anymore. Right. So I have no idea what people are saying. But several years ago when all this began, I remember calling a couple people, and one person, I said, well, let's have lunch. No.
Wow.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty cool, but hey, I believe it. I believe it when you've done what Tucker's done to actually shed light on the foreign policy regime and the whole Israel first mentality. That's going to be the natural result. All dissidents are used to it. I'm just glad he takes it in good humor, as he always does. It's one of the best qualities he has, probably.
So when you went independent, you've been in D.C. because you got there for college. You've been there for 10 years. You know a lot of people.
Right.
Got there at 18, right?
Yes,
you
18 years old.
Independent at 28. So you know a ton of people. You're a social person, I happen to know. So you are going to tons of events and you have tons of friends. And all of a sudden you're going off in a direction, you're not spewing hate or bigotry at all, but you are saying things that other people are not saying. How intensely did people you know try to bring you back?
Yeah, almost
to the status
immediately.
quo?
There were a lot of warnings about, hey, this is dangerous. Or, I mean, my close friends knew that they supported me, but it was really like the professional friends, people who you're broadly acquainted with, are like, what's he up to? You know, what's his deal? What's happening here? And it's incredible how rapid that shrink can happen.
And just think about that. That's just due to his propensity to want to strike out his own, kind of be entrepreneurial, do his own thing outside of the corporate juggernaut, outside of the corporate system that he was trapped in to some extent. At least it seems like he's portraying it that way. And just being more individualistic and driven in your own interests for people to say that are within the machine saying, hey, what's going on? What's the problem? And think about that, the conception that is innately a problem, that you would want to strike out on your own outside of this web of secrecy and darkness and evil that is the Washington, D.C. swamp.
In terms of not being invited to these things anymore, or, just being as a social outcast, or your phone stops ringing to various different things.
Did you feel that right away?
Almost, I wouldn't say immediately, but it did happen like quite rapidly. A 6-month, maybe a 1-year period. Israel was actually the final straw. In particular, after October 7th, that was almost an immediate cutoff from the entire professional network.
Why?
Because of course you are. The whole professional network is driven by the Israel First creed. It's almost like a religion. If you don't support their wars of choice, makes excuses for the genocide in Gaza, praise Netanyahu, call him a war hero, try to get the charges against him dropped, side with Israel over U.S. security interests and U.S. foreign policy interests as it relates to Iran. If you don't want to alter hate speech laws such that they make special carve-outs against anti-Semitism, then you're an enemy. You're an enemy of the state. And that is what he experienced. Apparently, that's what a lot of dissidents experience when they strike out in that way. But I do want to hear what he has to say about that, too.
Hi, what did you say?
Well, I said that I think that the way that Israel was conducting itself in Gaza was not befitting of a civilized Western nation, and that the United States didn't have a compelling interest in what was going on there, and that we should just focus on ourselves. I said all the same things about Ukraine, and many of them agreed with me then. Apparently, that was the red line.
That's the irony, too, is that there's such a stark difference in how a lot of the left compared to how a lot of the right views those two theaters, and most of the time doesn't apply the same lessons that they understand the folly in U.S. involvement in that theater and apply them to the other theater. How many Republicans do you know that want to cut off all support to Ukraine but don't want to do that at all to Israel? They want to ramp it up. And vice versa. There's a lot of people on the left that want to cut it all off to Israel and continue the money flowing to Ukraine. And this is very generalistic. Generalities here. It's not the dissident left or right that has this mentality, but a lot of the American populace for sure is trapped into this dichotomy. But the same lessons are involved in each, that these entangling alliances and proxy wars and, bombing runs and regime change operations are fruitless. They're senseless. They never pay off in the end, and they always lead to catastrophe. But I wish more people would apply those same lessons to every theater of war.
For them. But
what kind of reaction did you get?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is, calling people in my social circle, asking why I'm so anti-Semitic now. Why?
Actually?
Yes. Yeah. No, that actually happened. And a lot of it is also just generally a freeze of communication or discomfort, being in presence. And I think people should hear about this, because what I just described, that social capital, when that's everything, this is how those norms are enforced within the system, even if you've never received any money from any of these people, which of course most of them have. And so you put all of that together and you really watch this like professional nexus and others, where you're just almost immediately rejected from like the inner sanctums of the Imperium. But I mean, something that traces back to like wanting to go independent was this knowledge that outside of the Imperium are all of these other rising, you know, almost revolutionary forces of the Joe Rogan podcast, Dave Smith, Daryl Cooper, Andrew Schultz, Theo Vaughn, all of these individuals. By the way, many of the comedians I listed don't even consider themselves political, but it's because they're not connected to the system that they're able to say and observe truths that nobody in professional comedy or Hollywood-connected comedy or any of these other would ever dare.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. If you're not naturally into politics, you are generally prone or, you know, inclined to understand things about human behavior and human relations and psychology that someone that's, you know, trapped inside the political regime would not necessarily pick up on. And I really see that from people like Theo Vaughn, who's basically as real as can be, just a regular guy, you know, that does dabble in politics, but he has, you know, the working man's, the layman's viewpoints, not viewpoints, but perspective and approach to it in a way that I'm not insulting him whatsoever. It's really valuable, I think, to get that approach rather than just being totally inundated in this whole thing and, you know, being so immersed in it such that all of your lingo is based on these political refrains, political themes, platform themes, you know, the party tribalistic themes and platforms. But people like Theo Vaughn really do a great job and fill a really important space. And you're going to see that space get bigger and bigger throughout time, I think.
You know, be able to even give a voice to these types of ideas. And so I chose the latter, you know, over the former.
What did you think of the, so I know all the people you just mentioned. I think so much of every one of those people. I'd add Tim Dillon to that list.
Yeah, oh, of course, Tim.
Wonderful person. But now I'm being bitchy. I can't control myself. The quality of the people. So you get expelled from, you leave, but you're also shunned by your former world. You enter this new world that includes all the people you just listed. How would you compare the quality of the people?
It's night and day difference. And if we disagree, they just don't care. There's no, you know, professional freeze out. There's no, you know, there's not as many hard feelings.
You could look right in Dave Smith's face and say, the things you just said that you believe so deeply, I think are stupid. And he'd still go to dinner with you.
Of course he would. I disagree with Dave on a lot, mostly on economics. I don't think he cares at all. You know, we talk all the time. And that's a really important point, right?
Oh.
Yeah, you're not held to the standard of the corporate media world, apparently. And that's really interesting. That is an interesting dynamic that I think will persuade more people in corporate journalism to strike out on their own, if not for just seeing the success of people that have done that, like Piers Morgan and Megyn Kelly. Whatever you think about those two, they've done a really good job kind of striking out on their own. I think Piers Morgan's show, definitely don't agree with him on a lot, is at least very entertaining, and it's something that has really blown up. Those debate conversations are really good. He's a great devil's advocate. Again, you know, this is going to be an unpopular opinion. I know some people consider him unpalatable, but the way he sets up the debates is actually really interesting. And, you know, people can learn from that. I think they will learn from that. He's learned the ultimate lesson that, you know, the Don Lemons never will, because they kind of shrink into the same kind of rhetoric that just ruined the corporate media and continues to ruin it now and will ultimately lead to its demise.
Is that the verboten issues and the enforcement of all of that is part of why a lot of these people have found the tremendous amount of success that they have. And that is what still gives me some hope about where we are.
I totally agree. That there, you know, I believe in God, and I do think that there's like an upside, you know, you go through suffering, but there's always like a redemptive quality to it. And in this specific case, like you find the new people, you know, you do lose friends. Have you lost friends?
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I still am sad about it. But boy, the people you meet are like the most honest, interesting, decent. Like the quality, I'm sorry to reduce it to this, but the quality of the marriages among the people, you know, who are telling the truth versus the quality of the people who are paid to lie or who are too afraid to tell the truth. Boy, they just have just happier people.
Yes.
Better people.
Of course. Well, I mean, what kind of person who lives?
And if you're a cog in a machine and you're like having Mark Levin on night after night, even though everyone knows it's like absurd, how can your wife respect you?
I don't know, Or getting up at 3:30 a.m. in the morning, I'm sure used to in the morning show gig, and having to read from the prepared packet for yourself. You know, good luck, honey. I hope the kids are okay in the morning. And then, you know, reducing your life to all of that for what For what purpose?
No, it's totally
and
right.
that and these are mechanical, but they're macro and important issues.
Nicely put.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear these two talk about this issue in particular because both were corporate media journalists and then struck out on their own. It does give me some sense of optimism for the future that, video blogging and independent news shows, the Tim Pools of the world, the Joe Rogans of the world, and the Chris Williamsons of the world, they are going to be the ones taking over. And I wouldn't be surprised if by 2028 we have presidential debates on podcasts that are much more widely viewed than the debates that, CNN or Fox News will host. I really think that we're in that juncture in history now where that is just impossible to avoid. And you see them kicking and scratching, but the corporate media doesn't know how to deal with this. And, I've seen some kind of quasi come to Jesus moments, I guess, after the last election where you had panelists on like CNN talking about, well, what do we do? How can we fix this? Why did Trump get elected? Why don't they trust us? And, they never stand back and, take some humble pie and realize it's because of all the lies that you've sold to the public. You become unpalatable to the common person because of how much you've lied to them, how much you've sold lies, sold wars, sold garbage, and regime propaganda that has led to more control over their lives, more destruction in their livelihoods and their economic standing, more costly things that they would have to pay for to provide for their children and provide for their family. It's the combination of all of those things that have opened up this door to the independent media, and a lot of people are taking that door. And I'm so thrilled to hear, a lot of people my age, I'm 42, well, I'm almost 42, talk about how they no longer watch cable news. This is a dying thing. And I think that's a good thing. That's the best death we can hope for. And a lot of people just consume news on websites or Twitter. They get news fed to them very quickly. They watch YouTube and they watch these independent media shows to gain information that way. And that's replacing a key element of, everyone's lives that would want to stay informed, but not always coated with the same level of propaganda that they would get through cable news and before cable news existed through the New York Times. So that's where we're at. I'm optimistic about the rise of the independent media. Again, it's probably the most uplifting and inspiring thing about the culture to me. It's why I'm particularly white-pilled about the culture. So what do you guys think? Let me know down below. Do you agree with the sentiments that Saagar and Tucker shared? Do you think that the corporate media will die within a generation? Is there any merits still to be left with the corporate media or any role they actually play? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Tucker also. He's a great host and a great podcaster. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you get access to all my videos before they're released on YouTube to the general public. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.